stop and look around once in a while, you could miss it.
Never tell me the odds.
The greatest idea in human history, the theory of evolution by natural selection.
You must unlearn what you have learned.
As a date with destiny. In order to be able to think, you have to risk being offensive.
We're living in captivity, and it's time to break free.
Welcome to A Wilder Life with Eric Edmeades.
Welcome back to another episode of A Wilder Life. I'm your host, Eric Edmeades. And as always, what we are talking about here is the big question. How is it possible that living in what might be the very best times, the most secure times, the safest times ever to be alive, why are so many people sick and suffering? Why are so many people addicted? Why are so many people requiring therapy? And frankly, why are so many people opting out of the game? And so I am going out there to find the very best experts in the world to help us close what I call the evolution gap, the gap between our ancient evolutionary processes and the incredible innovations that we've created in our technologies, in our food supply, in our society, and how some of those gaps might be causing us difficulties today. And I think today we'll end up talking a lot about mineral gaps. Today we're joined by Barton Scott, a biochemist, chemical engineer, founder of Upgraded Formulas. And Barton's on a mission to tackle one of the most overlooked health issues of our time, mineral deficiencies. And of course, with that, issues caused by heavy metals in the body. And Barton's a good buddy of mine, so I'm actually really thrilled to have him here because frankly, I'll bet you that this is a conversation he and I would have had beside the fire anyway. Barton, welcome to the show. Really glad to have you here.
For sure. Love that intro. Thank you, Eric. And great to be back with you. There's so much to cover here. It's going to be a fun conversation. And yeah, very much like a fireside chat because you and I have talked about these things before and we have really similar views on it and each have a very complementary lens, I would say. And looking at things from, it's been popular, say lately, a first principles point of view. It's really just a ground up way of approaching things where step by step, you eliminate the ability to make a mistake, really, just based on laws of physics, chemistry, biology, things that are concretely understood. And yeah, we'll make it super relatable. And yeah, I wish we could do a dynamic Q&A, but we'll do our best to approximate that.
Yeah, absolutely. Listen, I want to start with this sort of acknowledgement, disclaimer, combination of acknowledgement and disclaimer. And that is that over the last, say, 30 years that I've been interested in the sort of ancestral lifestyle movement, dating back to my early 20s, I have really focused on natural solutions to modern problems as best possible. And I've not done that to avoid modern solutions. It's just that in my estimation, most modern solutions are being sold on fear or are being sold as shortcuts. And as a clumsy example, vitamin D deficiency certainly can be solved by a vitamin D supplement. I just would prefer to go with sunlight if I could. Now, if I live in Seattle, that's going to be a problem, of course. And so I will say this, that I've never been like the anti-supplement guy, but I've been the very reluctant supplement guy for a long time. And I'll explain that the WildFit, the traditional view of WildFit has been the very first job is to, as closely as possible, replicate the way of life that we evolved. And then after that, if you observe a deficiency, say a vitamin D deficiency, that what you should then do at stage 2 is to look for the most natural solution to that deficiency. And then at the third stage, if that's impractical or not working, then you look to a modern solution. And that modern solution might be supplementation or red light therapy in this case, or something else that comes along. And I have to say that in the various conversations you and I have had in a variety of different countries over the year, in fact, I have a picture here, thanks to you. I thought, what the hell? I'll share that. Me, Mission CEO of Mind Valley. And I don't know what's going on with our fashion sense at that particular event. But the fact is, that night and many others, we've done some fascinating conversations. And you've definitely opened my receptivity to expanding my own use of supplements and my advice to my clients about that. So let's dive in there. First, let me ask you to comment on my trifecta, on my idea. First of all, get it right. Secondly, look for a natural solution. Thirdly, look to technology. What's your take on that? Am I way off base?
I love that. I love that, really. And this hasn't been something we've talked about super specifically, but it's a natural ground up way of solving a problem, which is don't use a bazooka to kill a fly, use a fly swatter.
Yeah.
And so if the problem really isn't much more than this person has GI issues, acne, brain fog, can't sleep. It might be solvable with removing toxic triggers from their diet and just eating like hey, you're like most people, you're suffering from inflammation related to gluten, dairy, all sorts of things, right? But let's start with gluten and dairy and let's see if that makes any change at all. And of course, I can guarantee it will, as you would. And that made a huge difference in my life, gluten in particular. So I haven't eaten gluten since 22 or something, and I'll be 38 soon. And so the ground up way of thinking, I'm 100% on board with. The technology part of it came in for me to skip forward a step, but tie it all together, if I can, is the way I've looked at it is what I've seen through testing, and we can talk about different testing methods and things later for people, and what I found that works best and why it works well and why other things don't work as well in some cases, is that if we're not testing, we're guessing. And then that's pretty absorbable, pretty digestible for a thought, I think. And where it got really dicey for me, I know in hearing your own story to where you are now in health and philosophy and habit and everything you've taught for a long time, is you were eating a diet and not thinking much of it and being sick. And I think, thinking of food earlier in life because of wrestling in particular, but I still wasn't feeling good. And because I was still eating some toxic triggers that I didn't know were toxic. I didn't know that, of course, glyphosate as well, with all the gluten containing products in the US, basically. And so I started to cut these things out. I read a book called Clean by Dr. Alejandro Unger at 21 or something. It really changed my life. And then I had my own health issues I was overcoming, a lot of brain fog, hypothyroidism, Hashimoto's, a lot of different things. I don't want to bore the audience, but at some point in the last 12 years, I would say I went through many of the conditions that are common today because, and this kind of gets to your point of why even think about supplements or science or biohacking, let's just get the food right. It's because our bodies are up against so much, I realized. A real stat is the atmosphere and water are roughly 1,000 times more toxic than they were 80 years ago. So any other time in recorded history. And that's not true everywhere in the world, obviously. You go to Hawaii or something where you are, possibly in the Dominican Republic. I'm out here on the beach in Miami, and to be able to ground and go out in fairly clean water and things like that, but you're still sitting in traffic breathing brake dust with cadmium and lead and arsenic in it. And that wasn't the case for our ancestors. It's not how we biologically evolved. So I think we share the same or very similar viewpoint in tracing back the anthropological nature of things and going, what's changed, what's the same, and what do we do about it?
Yeah. It strikes me that from my own experience and from some of the things you're saying, that really when somebody's dealing with, let's say, a health crisis of some kind, let's say a non-trauma based health crisis of some kind, then the two obvious places to look are you putting something in that's causing a problem, or are you missing something that's exacerbating a problem? And one of the ways that I often, in our practices, we talk a lot about core principles. And one of the core principles in the WildFit community is that your health is far more dependent upon you getting your needs met than by eliminating the bad stuff. Instagram is full of don't eat kale and don't eat meat and don't eat milk and don't eat. If you listen to Instagram, you would basically not be allowed to eat anything. And the little thought experiment that we offer about that is if we took a human being and we put them in a dome, and in that dome, there was this perfect controlled environment where there was no glyphosate and there were no cadmium dust clouds from brake pads, and there was no heavy metals, and it was just a clean, perfect environment. And all the nutritional needs were there. They were getting all whatever 13-ish vitamins, minerals, all the fatty acids, all the aminos, everything was there. And they were required to move around to get those things. Then I think you would agree that the person in that dome would probably be pretty healthy. But then, without having introduced glyphosate, without having introduced cadmium, without having introduced anything, if we simply remove the vitamin C from the citrus fruits or from the liver that they're eating or wherever they're getting their vitamin C from, what's going to happen to that person?
Yeah, scurvy, for sure. Yeah, exactly. It's a good example. And when we think about that through the lens of what would happen there, I would say in that dome, and you may have mentioned this, but if the person was in fact stressed, just that stress, that emotional thought, so a great environment, but the mental environment was moderately to severely toxic, where they're having destructive mental thoughts, just those thoughts are going to cause stress. That stress can cause leaky gut. That leaky gut can cause just a malabsorption.
Also, couldn't it cause the overconsumption of nutrients?
100%. Yeah, absolutely. And here's the other thing that's really interesting that a lot of people may, I think it will make sense immediately, but they may not have thought of, which is why you may currently be overweight is just simply that the food doesn't have the nutrients, let's say potassium or manganese or whatever your body's really craving. And so your body goes, all right, we've got to get those nutrients. So we're going to eat 30% more.
Yeah.
And so that's a really difficult thing from a caloric, if you're trying to achieve caloric deficit and also have enough vital energy to be able to not procrastinate on things.
Yeah, as I've spent a significant amount of time with the Hadza people in East Africa, and these are like proper hunter-gatherer types, living about as close to what we might think of as an ancestral lifestyle possible. And one of the things that you really understand about them when you spend time with them is that they don't have specific cravings. They have generalized cravings. We have specific cravings. I want a Cinnabon, or I want ice cream, or I want not just cookies, but I want Chips Ahoy. We have these specified cravings, and those are almost always emotionally anchored, linked, bought and paid for, sponsored, manipulated in some way. What they have is generalized, and they're generalized like they crave fat, they crave sweet, they crave salt, very generalized cravings. And I think that really goes to what you said earlier. If you think that you're running low on, say, a number of nutrients, there's not, you're not going to go, oh, I'm craving that berry. And the reason that we wouldn't have evolved that is that berry was only available for 2 weeks. So there was no point craving it when it wasn't there. And so instead, the body just goes, go and eat some shit. Like you're missing stuff. Go eat whatever's available right now. Go and eat that and get as much of it, by the way, as you can, because starvation is a constant threat. And so you take that Paleolithic frame, thought process, evolved cravings, you take all that and you put it in the Mall of America.
Wow. Dippin' Dots.
Get this message, go eat some stuff, eat more than you need and prepare for tomorrow. And then you look around at is a silly joke, but we talk about carbs, eating carbs as the preparation for winter, fattening up and preparing for that winter. And as I'm looking around the Mall of America, there's some people that are not preparing for winter. They're preparing for the next ice age. They're ready, man. They're ready. And so I think that idea that you're talking about, that generalized, so now you're deficient, and I have a really important question I want to ask you about this. You're deficient. You don't necessarily know what you're deficient in because maybe you haven't gone off and done a blood test or what have you, and there's no direct, you're not even symptomatic yet. You're just deficient. So your body starts setting up a generalized hunger signal, and now you're eating Cinnabon, which is not satisfying the nutritional requirement. So are you suggesting then that by addressing those mineral vitamin deficiencies, that in itself plays a part in appetite suppression?
Oh yeah, hugely. Not to plug it, but just to answer that question directly, like the minerals that are in the metabolism product, Upgrade Metabolism, that I put together probably 5 years ago, really are that solution that I needed myself because I was eating ice cream in the evening. And I was like, what am I? And I didn't have it in the house. I would have to go out and buy it like down the street.
It's a strong drive.
And I was like, what the hell? And I realized two things. One, I was deficient in different minerals that are all in that blend, like zinc, chromium, even vanadium to a much lesser extent. Yeah, and magnesium plays a role in that. The calcium magnesium ratio that we look at in hair testing is a really important. And so I was hypoglycemic for a long time. And I see a lot of like very fit people actually be hypoglycemic when I've looked at their hair tests throughout the years, or our team has, and we've looked at trends and different things. And so where else was I going with that? Oh, the other part too of this that I'm sure a lot of your audience can relate to, and things you probably have coached on many times before, is the other reason why you may be binging if you eat an otherwise good diet in the evening. Yes, it can certainly be emotional for sure, but the other part is you didn't eat enough calories during the day when you should have been eating when the sun was up. And so now it's 9 p.m. and your body's, hey, we did a lot of mental work today and physical work, what have you. And so we're down like 600, 900 calories. How do we get that quickly? Ice cream, something fat and sweet. And it's a multi-pronged approach to that solution. The body's, oh yeah, no problem, because it's thinking of right here, right now.
Yeah. One of the things that we observed in helping people upgrade their relationship with food is that very often, and in particular, women as they're heading into or experiencing this sort of hormonal change that comes along with menopause, is that running a calorie deficit during that time is antithetical to losing weight.
Yeah.
And it's a really tough thing because they've been bombarded by the diet industry for all these years that you got to portion control and count their calories and shit. But what it turns out is that many of those people, when they run a calorie deficit, they put themselves into increased cortisol production, find themselves, their body says, I'm not releasing this fat. There seems to be a food shortage going on. Why would I release my fat during a food shortage? And then the minute we upgrade, particularly protein, the minute we upgrade their, assuming they're not vegetarian or vegan, we deal with that a little bit differently. But the minute they upgrade their meat intake, their egg intake, all of a sudden the body goes, oh, I can begin to release. And that's really fascinating. And for many of them, it's so baffling because they're like, but I'm eating more than I've ever eaten. And the weight's coming. And that's fascinating.
And quick side note for people, fertility wise, I've helped different people just get pregnant just by eating as much as double of their calories. We have a lot of women, they're trying to get pregnant, they're eating 1,200 calories. We bump them up to 2,400. They're concerned they're going to gain weight, but they get pregnant and they're eating healthy foods like you're talking about.
Yeah. At the extreme level, of course, athletic women that drop below 12 or 14% body fat, they stop menstruating. And I know there's a lot of alarmism about that. Oh my God, it's bad that they've stopped. I'm like, in the hunter-gatherer world, it was a good idea not to get pregnant when there wasn't a lot of food around. That was a thing. And then as soon as the fall comes back and the root vegetables are there and the berries come back, they fatten back up again. Bam, pregnant.
Boom, pregnant. Yeah. Super
so
cool.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So let's talk about, let me say this. You and I spoke, I guess, first time maybe 2 or 3 years ago and having this conversation about supplements. And I recently went through the experience of going and doing the full spectrum blood exam and blood tests and so forth and looking at everything. And I found it really fascinating. And on the one side, I found it really validating. From a metrics perspective, they said I was in the top 0.1% of metrics. Everything was good. Great. I've invested in that. I've worked on it. But there were some things that came up that really showed me that even though I'm really focusing on my nutrition, I am working out, I'm taking care of myself, there was stress. And that stress was leading to some deficiencies. And it really hammered home that point that even inside that perfect dome that we talked about before, all the right food, all the right water, all the right everything. But if you're under stress, and by the way, the one thing that nobody ever points out about that dome when I use that example is the dude's in there alone.
Yeah,
he's missing physical contact, emotional connection. Nobody ever zooms in on that. But the fact is, and so in my numbers, I saw some really encouraging things. Like here's a big one. I am really curious about your thoughts on this relative to testosterone, because of course, here's the big thing these days. Oh my God, you're over 40. You should be TRT. You got to get your, and I'm like, but I'm not symptomatic in any way. And yeah, but you're over 40. So anyway, I admit in my mid 40s, I got talked into it. I tried it out for a few months and guys, you're going to feel like you're 25 again. And I'm like, okay, whatever, let's do it. And I did not feel like I was 25 again. I didn't feel any different in any way at all until I stopped. And when I stopped, I just went flat. Flat. It took about 2 or 3 months before I came back. And so, of course, I never did that again. But recently, I went and had all the tests, as I mentioned. And I don't know what the measurements are, but my T numbers were like 950 or something. I don't even know what that means. I can't. But they
really good.
Yeah, the buddy of mine whose lab it was, he goes, we call that heroic.
Yeah, that's really good.
It was super sweet. But think about that. It means that 10 years earlier, 10 years before that, I was sold TRT on the basis of fear and then actually messed myself up a little bit with that. And so I think
Testing, not guessing. Yeah.
Yeah, I wanted to talk about that. What do you recommend to people around testing? What should they do? Because I got to tell you, I made a mistake by not testing.
That is one area where I do like blood tests. If I'm of the opinion through all the things I've seen, especially if someone is even on a budget or time budget too, like in a hurry, they should look at all their elements, and we can go into why later, but that's done through hair, and why is that more accurate? We can talk about that. But the idea of looking at your total and free testosterone and this is for women too, by the way. Women should have, I think it's it's at least 4, but between 4 and 10 times more testosterone than estrogen. That seems alarming to some people because it's never really talked about in most circles when we're trying to help a woman lose weight or get pregnant or have sex drive or have mental function or any of these things. We think of it as a male hormone, and it just is not, in the way that estrogen is not purely female. There's certainly a balance there. And obviously a healthy man's going to still have 10 times more testosterone than a healthy woman, and therefore the ability to build muscle and do a lot of other things faster. But on the muscle building side and repair side and things like that. But when I hear 950, if that was your total testosterone, to share a brief story, so mine is right around there now. I haven't checked it in, I don't know, 4 or 5 months because I just know I feel great.
Yeah.
But mine, and so like 1,000's really like top of range. 1,200's like maybe if you're like 21, 22 or something, and you're just like in the sun all the time and like living a low stress life and hitting the weights pretty hard and recovering plenty. Like you can see those numbers happen, but that's usually like puberty time all the way up to 22 or so. I would say that most men and women, though, by 25 today, if you're listening to this and you are older than 25 or even 25 or around there, most likely you're low in T. And the way to fix that is not to take a hormone. The way to fix that is to take building blocks as if you are eating superfoods and actually absorbing them, which most people have leaky gut to some extent, low stomach acid, some digestive process, such that their digestive process, and this is a key point, is about 30% efficient. So you take in 1,000 milligrams of potassium, you probably absorb a third of that, maybe or something. And most people are only taking in 300 and they need 4,000. And so they're in an adrenal deficiency state just from that. And then we layer in blue light, circadian disruption, not enough grounding, not enough sun, not enough time in nature, not enough community, isolation, all these different things, like you mentioned in the dome setting. So a lot of different things to go there. So I did a fertility clinical trial on upgraded tea, which was the only non-mineral product I've put out to date. And we're able to get people to go roughly 100% up if they were at a low number, 2 or even 400. That trial was initially done only with men, just to keep everything simple and easy. But the standard applies really equally to women, where, you know, if you need to raise it, it's safe, and it's like you're not going to start growing beard hair or stuff, anything crazy like that. A lot of women fear, oh, you're not going to put on too much muscle, which is like the common fear that you hear a lot of women talk about that haven't really exercised or lifted, and then they'll tell you simultaneously they want to look like this woman that lifts 3 or 4 or 5 times a week.
Yeah. My eldest daughter, she's super, just gorgeous in every way and really committed to her health. She went through some pretty big health issues a couple of years ago, and so we got her on what we call Hunter Spring in WildFit, which is a season of carnivore living. And she's basically been dedicated to that now for about 2 years, and she lifts all the time, heavy. And she was like, but what if I'm going to get muscly? And I'm like, I'll tell you what, you can come in here 3 days a week eating the way you are, and a man would muscle up like crazy. You're just going to tone up. If you need it, you're not going to. And guess what? 2 years in, she's just lean. She's good. She's not going to bulk up. But no kidding, it was her biggest fear.
Yeah, there you go. Oh my God, I can't tell you. I think I've had that conversation with every girlfriend I've had as they've asked different questions or something. And there's just an ingrained societal thing, a fear with women that like, oh, you're gonna, that's, in my opinion, strong is sexy because strong is capable. Everyone has their type and everything, but certainly no one is attracted on the opposite end of can't really move in a wheelchair. That's the far end of the sliding spectrum. And so you want to be able to lift a backpack, climb some stairs while you do it. Like light, just even normal, very modernized life requires strength and muscle to protect from falls in late age too, if you're older and listening to this. Like number one, I think frailty is one of the top causes at 75 or older of death. It leads to it. It's causative factor. Yeah.
And funny enough, here we go back to a really interesting mineral deficiency issue. Okay, here are some things that are supposed to happen as you get older. Your testosterone's going to drop. Your muscles, you're going to develop sarcopenia and you're going to lose your muscles. And by the way, your bone density is going to go for shit and that's going to be gone too. And these things are just going to happen to you. Of course, we know that it doesn't need to be that. Yeah, exactly. We know it doesn't have to be that way. And one of the things I find really interesting about that, I've always known that impact had a role in muscle density and in bone density. But one of the things that really got me is that you can be supplementing up or eating really well, but if you're not placing your muscles under or your bones under stress, they're then not going to absorb those. Am I understanding that correctly?
So your bones, just like the hormetic effect of lifting and creating those micro tears in muscles and then rejuvenating through the healing process, the bones are tissue. We forget that, but bones, ligaments, and muscles are all tissue. They're more similar than they are different. We think of them as like vastly like different planets almost in a solar system. They're so similar. And we do store minerals in different places though throughout the body. And one thing that I look at is it would be really telling if we could, this is a tangential thing, but it's related to bone health, particularly as we age. So anyone that's had osteoporosis or penia or any sort of bone condition at all ever have been mineral deficient for such a long time, I'm talking decades, that what has happened is the body initially pulls from the blood and tries to nourish the body. It's the process. The blood should nourish the body. We go in and, side note, and test the blood and we wonder why our tests come back really normal. And I don't mean hormones, that's fine, but mineral levels, it's just not a good place. And the reason why is I think of it as three different things, like three places you put your money. So checking account, savings account, retirement account, let's say, right? So you've got your checking account and that's your blood. So if I look at your checking account, but you're someone that doesn't keep a lot of money in your checking account because you keep it invested or you keep it in savings, that doesn't tell me much about your financial picture. It could be awesome, but then the person could have all sorts of debt. And really the way the body handles that debt is it goes to the tissue, which is hair is also tissue. And that's one of the reasons why we use that test. Skin is tissue, bones are tissue. And so the bones would be the retirement account. And then anything in between that, like hair or skin, if we were to biopsy your liver, for example, that would be, and in between that'd be like a savings account. Your bones are the last place we never want to pull from retirement account either to replenish a checking account. And so in that same way, that's what we're looking at here. And we're going, okay, so why does this person have a normal blood test or fairly normal, right? And then they're at the same time having these issues like osteopenia, osteoporosis. How is this possible? That's how it's possible.
Okay, years ago, I was reading about this research for something I was writing about, and you probably know more about this, so you can help me out here. But my understanding is that mammals, you said earlier, we never want to draw from the retirement account, but the truth is we actually need to sometimes. And what I mean by that is, at least if I'm understanding this, is that in the case of, say, calcium, that is largely stored in the skeletal system, calcium is also used to regulate pH. So if you go from a wild fit perspective, you go into a season during which your blood pH becomes excessively acidic, rather than die, you take a loan from the central bank of calcium to create calcium bicarbonate to alkalize the blood a little bit. And so what that means is at any given point in time, you could be testing the blood and the blood's going to be fine, but it's not going to reflect the debt that you have in the skeleton. Is that
Yeah, so yes, and I would just say if that condition remains chronic, and it does for most people because they're eating sweets,
Right.
alcohol, and too much coffee, all of those things causing a hyperacidic, prolonged acidic environment, then obviously the central bank can only print money for so long, so to speak.
Right. And then
And
it becomes
so,
chronic, and then now you're talking
boom.
osteoporosis.
Exactly. Ding, ding.
Right.
And that is exactly what happened to my mother, which I didn't tell that part of the story yet, but I was having my own health issues, but then I was born to older parents. I was lucky to be close with my family, but she ended up passing away at 67. And for the 4 or 5 years leading up to that, I was in my late teens, early 20s. I was essentially the nutritionist for the family, and it went from an interest to a necessity to figure this out because no one had any answers, especially in that time period. This was like 12 years ago. So what happened with her was exactly what we're talking about, strangely enough. And so she was told she had osteopenia. She was taking calcium supplements, by the way, and religiously. And she followed every piece of advice she ever got. And unfortunately, it was just all like 180 degrees off of center. And so we don't need more calcium typically to make strong bones. We need other things like magnesium and boron. Those are hard to get. Calcium is like so ubiquitous. It's so easy to get. That
Well, and
balance.
frankly, let's just talk about milk for a moment.
Oh God, yeah.
The highest milk drinking countries in the world have the highest levels of osteoporosis in the world. So look, I know we're not allowed to draw on correlation. It has to be causal, but I'm like, hold on, that's a pretty tight correlation.
That's a tight correlation.
And it's an opposite correlation because hey, look, I'm not saying milk is causing the problem. Maybe it isn't. I have an opinion about that. But what I'm saying is if it's supposed to be the solution to the problem,
it can't be the opposite.
There seems to be a logic gap there.
Totally. And we're not talking about raw milk with all the different enzymes and like a much better bioavailability of other things and richer sourcing and most likely grass-fed and not corn-fed and therefore no glyphosate, which is a huge thing. I would bet a lot of money that if you tested any milk in the US on any shelf that was not grass-fed, it would have glyphosate in it somehow, somewhere, and probably a lot of it. And so when it's something you're drinking and drinking daily, in some cases multiple meals, that's going to have
and then you're drinking the congealed form in the way of cheese, which condenses the volume of milk into a smaller amount, increasing the glyphosate content and so on.
Yeah. Super nasty combo there. And so you can see that I think of a lot of these things, if I give a visualization to everyone listening, is think of a seesaw and think of in some cases, a multi-part seesaw where you've got someone really heavy on one side and you've got no one on the other side. That's what consuming a lot of calcium today is like. Because I can tell you that everyone born today, almost without exclusion, is minerally deficient and also high in certain things like calcium. They're high in certain things like copper.
They're just readily available
too. Like jaundice, for example, is just high copper that gets downloaded from mother to baby, gets stored in the liver, and then the child never really has a functioning liver, and you got in the eyes. And yes, you can clear it out and you can reverse it, but only if you know what you're doing and if you're testing things accurately. And then in some cases, there is a case for hyper supplementing things that absorb well. But what I realized too, just for people that haven't heard me speak anywhere else, is that not only were medications not working, but certain supplements were not working well either. Because when I started doing testing on her, my mother that is, and myself, I realized that at totally different ages, we had similar problems, which was that we were taking things that we were deficient in. So we're both taking magnesium and we're both deficient in magnesium. We're taking a lot of it 6 days a week for a year and a half, and we're still deficient in it. And so my background being in chemical engineering, it was really obvious to me, oh, this is an absorption issue. And so with the understanding of nothing really is a perfect system in terms of utilization of nutrients, like your car, the combustion engine is like 30% efficient also. the engine in the body, the digestive system, about 30% deficient if things are going well. And so if you absorb nutrients at 10% rate, like through supplements, food's usually about a third as well, then you don't reverse the deficiency. And that's just a really clear path to not reversing the issue. And
Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
yeah. If you're there, you're stuck and you're going, okay, so I have this deep deficiency. You're telling me I need to supplement the potassium. I need to eat foods high in potassium. Okay, I got it. And the truth is, if you just take regular supplements, those weren't working either. So that was the solution that became what I do today, which is making supplements absorb without digestion so that the body can, and of course, yeah, you have to absorb a capsule if you're taking something that has a capsule from us, but getting that into the body and into the blood specifically without digestion became the path and the solution.
Okay. It raises two things for me. The first one is going back to the calcium buffer system, because I think it makes the argument that you're making really well. The reason that we evolved this calcium buffer system is that humans lived with different seasonal availability of food, which meant that one season might cause a more acidic digestion, a more acidic response in the body, and one season might cause a more alkaline response. And so therefore, our body learned to be able to regulate acidity by borrowing and repaying loans to the bones. And if you are running that cycle properly, there's a season where you're producing a more acidic response, you're borrowing calcium from the bones into the blood, balance it off, not much anyway. Then the season switches over, or you end up in a fasting season, and all of a sudden you don't have that acidity in your blood anymore. And then the calcium is redeposited back to the bones. And this runs on a cycle, meaning you don't end up with the calcium deficiency, you end up with cash flow. You end up with calcium
That's
flow.
fine. That's fine. It's like having a credit line in a business and pulling from it and paying it off. That would be fine. People just aren't paying it off like they think.
That's my point. So what's happening for most people is they're getting stuck in that one season where they keep borrowing from the bones, and they think that the solution to that is to keep putting more in. And it was never a matter of not enough. It was a matter of not cycling properly or not being processed properly. I think that's an important distinction.
I think so. And just testing throughout that period, I've just realized in my own life too, when I've gone like 6 months without a test, recommend looking at things quarterly. And this doesn't mean 2 grand worth of blood work. This means like 1 hair test a quarter is what I found works for people. And so unfortunately, I wish it was more simple. I really do. But when I've seen other people that I've coached, so this is like celebrities, athletes, myself, my own family, people that I don't know and have never met, but looking at before and after tests and looking at distance, the people that get better are the ones that test often enough and make changes as needed. Just in the same way, it shouldn't be surprising, in the same way we use Google Maps and we're driving down the road and we exit and then we look over and we go, okay, new map essentially. Need to exit again in 2 miles. Okay, no problem. Need to turn left in 4 miles. No problem. Need to turn right after that in 0.2 miles. And then we're like, okay, we're going to get there. Now, we don't really get to the party, if that's where we're heading, if we look at navigation once or twice in a 20-mile stretch. Chances are low, right? And it really isn't. And I don't think we should anticipate or expect it to be very much different in the most important area of our life, which is our health, the foundation of everything. That doesn't mean that we have to like major and make our whole life about health. And also like the quality of our life will be influenced certainly to the level of our health and energy.
I want to switch gears a little bit to absorbability. I know that's something that you've worked a lot on, and one of the concerns that I've often had about, say, extracts or exogenous materials or isolated elements is that smart as we are, we don't really understand a lot of the relationships that are happening inside us. This is a clumsy example, but say there's a fruit that our ancestors were eating and that fruit was readily dispensing vitamin C. And so they ate that fruit and they got vitamin C from it. But of course, because that was their primary source of vitamin C, they got that vitamin C as a single note in an overall symphony of nutrition. And that it is therefore likely that other things were involved in that relationship. Now, the vitamin C is the obvious thing, but that there may have been other things that, say, for example, supported the absorption of that vitamin C, the processing of that vitamin C, or that were required in the utilization of that vitamin C. And so now, these days, we're all about, now that we figured out that vitamin C will let us conquer the oceans, which is how it started, right? Like,
Sure.
now that we know that, we just go and take that thing. So my curiosity about that is, first of all, how does that influence, from your perspective, how does that influence absorbability? And then what other deficiencies might that thinking lead to?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And that was Captain Cook, right? That figured out
Yeah.
scurvy, I believe. Yeah, really brilliant guy. I just listened to a whole podcast on him. So the thing that I realized that was a key insight that solves this to a certain extent is two things. And one is the testing, not guessing, and using the
Right.
right test. And that's part of it. And doing that frequently enough, that's part of it. We talked about that already. So that gives us a good map, and we get to see a lot like we would if we were playing a piano and hearing keys and
Yeah.
going like, all right, we're trying to find the right tone or perfect pitch in singing or something. And then if you have no ability to hear, then it's not, I've never used this example before, but it's a lot like not being able to understand your test results or not testing. And so that's part of it. But the other part of it is that the reason I chose to focus on elements is everything breaks down to an element, it turns out. So even our amino acids, which are a key thing and can also shift mood in huge ways, those break down to elements. Everything is a periodic table when you break it far enough down.
Yeah,
And
of course.
so when we test for the periodic table, we get to see things like, oh, your thyroid is under or overperforming, your adrenals are under or overperforming, your metabolism is low, and here's why. It's, well, your phosphorus is down compared to your calcium, and on different key ratios that have been established for decades. So when we look at that through consultations, we get to see that balance. And what we realize is when we get about 7 of these key ratios dialed, the elements and the ride along and the way the methylation system works in the body and so many other pathways that are very important all tend to work. There is one case that I can think that this points to really well, and that is B6, for example, in the methylation pathway is a really key nutrient. Now, not B12, not B5, specifically B6, which you can totally get through diet, but most people are deficient in today.
Yeah.
And yeah, that is something you want to supplement in addition to magnesium if you want to raise your magnesium level. A great example today that no one seems to be talking about, so I'm finally going to put out a product soon, is what to do about D3 when you're in Seattle, like you said.
Yeah.
So what do? You take D3. Do you only take D3? You take K2. Okay, do you only take K2? And how much? And how often? And the answer is you need other things. And it turns out without magnesium, D3 doesn't get activated. And without boron, D3 doesn't get activated. And without K2, it doesn't get utilized in the right direction.
This is exactly what
it like builds a highway in the wrong direction. You're like, all right, team, you're here. Great. And you show up, the foreman shows up, and they've been building a road a quarter mile in the wrong direction. You're like, this is not what we want. This is really bad. That ends up in a very real way clogging arteries and causing aneurysms, like in the case of my mother. She was taking too much calcium, and it just eventually made the arteries and the blood vessels in the brain brittle. And then you have bleeding in the brain, and it's all so preventable in almost every case. That's a beautiful part of it.
Let's go to you're writing now about, and we talked a little about pre-show about the impact on mineral deficiency and personality development. And this is actually something I've thought a lot about in the context of wild fit evolutionary biology, my book, The Evolution Gap. So I'm curious of your take. And I want to start this conversation with B6, since you brought it up. What is B6? It's like pyridoxine or something. I can't remember. But
yeah, I like to use the active form P5P, and this is really recent. This part that I'll mention right now is recent research, which is P5P, the active form, is the only one you really want to take in supplemental form, because the traditional, if it doesn't say P5P, if it says anything but that, then that form is going to clog the receptors. And unfortunately, those can stay clogged for like up to 2 years, apparently. So it's a real problem.
Okay.
and something I've learned about in the last month, actually.
Wow.
But
Okay.
I've always used the active form. So like in our formulations, it's active. Yeah.
So the reason I brought it up is you're talking about this relationship between the elements in personality. And of course, among the symptomology of B6 deficiency includes things like irritability and confusion, depression, and so on. So there is an effect on personality with something
Yeah.
like B6. And of course, we know there is with B12 and what have you. So I have a question for you. Have you given much thought to why that is?
Yeah, so with B6, we have this methylation pathway, this wheel, and we could pull the image up of it. It's one of the more complex things you'll see in biochemistry if you really study it. And some people have devoted their whole career to studying just the methylation pathway. And my presupposition there is a periodic table. If you get your elements right and you get the sort of top down right, if the leaders of the company are really strong, the people under them they have the ability to be strong and led well.
Yeah.
If leadership is really poor, then nothing is going to ever really go as well as it could. And that said, if you chunk down into this methylation cycle, you see that B6 is this gear that is placed throughout so many places that it's just this really important lock and key system. So if that's not there, there's so many other gears then that don't turn well. So then the body really doesn't have the ability to detox folinic acid, for example, and many other things throughout. And so the cells, to be happy, they need to be able to take out the trash and they need to be able to make energy. Those two things. So a clean house and an energized house with lights on, basically, is that little cell happy in its ecosystem. And so a happy cell, happy organ, happy body. And it's really those two things that you need. So it's okay, let's step back, look at it the other way and go, what do we need to do to create that?
All right. Let's see. Look, I can name the first 26 elements if you like: hydrogen, helium, beryllium, boron, nitrogen, calcium. I can do it, but it doesn't mean I understand it.
Sure.
And so when I look at those things, I'm not looking at it at that deeper bodily function because I'm not a chemist. What I'm looking at,
almost no one does, though, even chemists, like very few
There you
people. What took me a long time to realize is that my proclivity and interest in nutrition, and therefore like achieving, sorry to interrupt, but like achieving everything that we can achieve in life, which I know is something you've talked about too, it's directly correlated to how much energy you have.
Yeah.
So then nutrition, it's like, why are we learning all these things to begin with? It's to self-actualize, not to just self-optimize, but to actualize. And to do that, we certainly have to have a lot of energy and to be able to hurdle our traumas and get beyond so many different things and not get stuck in repetitive patterns of lower level behavior and things like that.
So where I'm going with that thought process is that it's very easy to say, okay, this deficiency leads to this dysfunction. What I want to suggest is that long before dysfunction shows up, we have evolutionary response, which might actually be function.
Yeah.
So
yes, 100%.
Yeah, the example that I would draw on here is also from the B family. But if we look at B12 deficiency, at the earlier stages, the symptomology includes irritability and basically irritability and aggression. And so if we were to look at that at a basic level, we'd say, well, that's dysfunction. You're deficient and now you're an asshole. So
yes,
there's
exactly.
a problem. But I want to suggest that instead what's going on is that in some cases, the presenting dysfunction is actually functional. And in the case, for example, of B12, I would argue that what's happening there is that ancestrally, if you were running low on B12, aggression and irritability may well be exactly what's required for you to get your B12 satisfied.
To go and fight or hunt.
To hunt or to just fight for your share. Years ago, I was with the Hadza people, and I've developed quite a friendship with Nona, who's the chief of one of the families that I spent a lot of time with. And we came back from a hunt at one point, and he handed me a big leg from a bush pig, and he wanted me to take it over to the women's fire. And my first reaction to that was, my mom used to hate that when my dad handed the fish and said, take them to your mom. So maybe that's what's going on here too. But no, I got to the women's fire and the women saw me coming with the meat, and they all came up and they all came to get their share of the meat, and they were cutting off strips and handing it to the children and so on. But what I noticed was there were some kids around the outside of the circle that weren't getting in there.
Mm.
And what made the difference of them getting in or not is how aggressive they were. The more they fought for their position to get in there. And that made me think about this whole B12 deficiency thing. It's like you start running low on B12, you become a little more irritable, a little more aggressive. That increases the chances of you succeeding in achieving B12. So it's not dysfunction, it's actually function. And it really becomes dysfunctional when we don't address it. Does that make sense to you?
That's the first time I've ever heard this posited, and it's very possible, and I can see how it could be adaptive. And so the question becomes, I get two questions for there. One, how does that translate to like Tim and Sally's current needs and life? And does it or does it not? I think it both does, it can, and we can also engineer around it. Is my sort of gut response answer there.
It's a really great question.
Right.
This comes into this idea of the evolution gap, because
it's interesting.
I would argue, and this is a little controversial, and we have many wonderful vegetarians and vegans in our overall wildlife community. And
oh, interesting. I see where you're going. Yeah.
You see where I'm going, right? So
yeah.
Here's the deal: is that you now have, look, there are many truly open, loving vegetarians and vegans out there, but we also know there's ideological, aggressive vegans. And to me, they're an example of unbelievable irony, because they're very likely, even meat eaters are having a hard time achieving their B12, but the people who are refusing to have them and refusing to supplement are like running low on B12. Their irritability and aggression is going up. And then that irritability and aggression is then contributing to their aggressiveness of their ideology.
Yeah.
It creates the most ironic thing. So in modern times, it's basically impossible to fix it for them, because, and it's really tough, because you're clearly not going to fix it by getting them to eat meat, because they're ideological. So they're not going to do that. But even to get them to admit that they would supplement means that they have to acknowledge that their ideology is scientifically flawed, and then they won't do that. And I have found that to be fascinating.
It's a really tough thing. Yeah, I've found that fascinating too. I know Paul Saladino is a great example, because he was a vegan at one point. A lot of people don't know
so was I.
But he was a ideological. I don't know if you were, where like he was just like the same way he is with carnivore, he was that way with veganism.
Oh, but he's not anymore with carnivore either, though.
No, exactly. Of course, but
I'll come back to that in a minute, because there's a story there.
I would just say to everyone, the pendulum swings. And so the conversation we're having about here is really about why it's different, is because it's about finding balance.
Yeah.
And doing that through nature, how we evolved, and also with the addition of science and testing and better absorption to fix deficiencies faster. The reason why is the speed at which you fix your deficiency is equal to the speed at which your ailment goes away. I can guarantee you that the people that have low immune systems, if they have they also have low levels of certain nutrients. And those can all be boiled down to elements, heavy metals that get in the way. And yeah, it's really fascinating. There's a couple things to say there too. On one side, Eric, we have like iron, like low iron amounts, and then too much iron can easily, and you see this with people that have been carnivore for a long time, they can become more aggressive than they should be. And I've seen it with friends, I've seen it with people. And so because iron, the personality of iron is outdated masculine. It's like unchecked power. And so too much iron with not enough copper and not enough vitamin A, copper balances it. Copper is very feminine. Zinc is more like an evolved masculine. That's leading from a place of taking multiple perspectives into account. So it's a really interesting element. And for that reason, it's also considered an organizing element in the body. So is magnesium.
Hold on. We're going all over the place. So I definitely want to touch on this issue of the iron for personal reasons. But
yeah.
I want to say this about Paul. Paul takes a lot of flack out there for a lot of different things. And
I like Paul too, but I'm just saying there's swings.
I know. One of the things I want to say that I admire about Paul is that, like me, he also I would say I probably was an ideological vegan. And I know that because if you sat and ate meat beside me, I would not let you know. You would know my opinion. And I think he was very much that same way. But it takes incredible strength of character to one day stand up and say, I'm not right about that. And I shared this story on the podcast before, but it's funny is that Paul and I we first met at a party at Gerard Butler's house in Los Angeles. And it was when he was still deeply carnivore. And he and I started having a debate that the friend who introduced us, the way he tells the story, he thought Paul and I were going to come to blows. I don't think either Paul or I felt that way, but it was like we were definitely banging heads on this. And he was carnivore, and I was like human diet, seasonal eating, and so on. And shortly after that, I took him and Anthony Gustine.
You told me that.
Yeah.
I remember that now.
After that, he came out and he's, you know what? Honey, fruit. Yeah. But man, the flack he took from the ideological carnivores are just the other end of the ideological vegan spectrum. Now, I want to touch on it because you talk about the iron to aggression thing versus the other end of the spectrum is the low. So
low iron is also like
I am
passive aggressive. Yeah.
I am generally fairly even-tempered guy. I had a temper in my 20s. I don't really have that. But lately, I've been under a lot of, unfortunately, some personal strains that have been a little difficult. And I've noticed that I'm shorter tempered than normal. And not in a bad way. But just snapping a little quicker than I would like. And then I correct it quickly because I have consciousness, but I don't like it. And funny enough, I told you, I got this big broad spectrum blood test done. And immediately they said, you got to go give a pint of blood now.
Oh, iron.
You are way up on iron. And the joke was, I was in Estonia where I can't give blood because I'm not Estonian. So I couldn't even go do that. And so I'm still sitting with all this iron in here.
Yeah.
But I know previously you had talked about counterbalancing iron with copper. And so I'd like to unpack that a little bit from a personal perspective. And I believe that my eldest daughter is also a little higher on iron than is ideal as well. So A, is giving blood a good idea. And then B, about counterbalancing copper, zinc, and that kind of stuff.
Super. And if I may, the point I wanted to make with anyone that's ideological, and I do totally clap for them if they change or if they're willing to change as new information comes in, is it's never a good idea to be ideological about diet.
Never. If you're ideological about your diet, you will sacrifice your health for your ideology. That's a problem.
Totally. So that's a great way to say it so that's one of the subtitles in my book that's coming out is why all diets fail. And so eventually is the idea, because if you stay on the same, it's like doing the same thing that got you into first grade and got you to pass. That's not going to work to get you through college. That's like, you're just different. You're a different person in a different place is the analogy. And so and that's based on, again, ding deficiencies. If you have this whole pie and here's all the elements that you could possibly eat and everything, right? And you keep eating from this third quadrant over here because like good things, but here's your whole pie, you're eating from this quadrant again and again, then you can develop food allergies and certainly deficiencies because you're eating a lot of good things, but then what happens when you eat only blueberries as your only fruit ever? There's going to be a consequence. That's the thing that I'm always pointing to is we may not know what it is unless we're testing. Yeah. But there for sure will be one. And the denial of that is denial of good logical thinking. And not that any of us are denying that, but and certainly I think people are not intending to deny such a obvious self-evident truth, and yet they are. And then with most diets that people become ideological about, they feel well enough because they've eliminated enough things, and then they get up on the pulpit and they're like, this was the best thing. And right about that point, the 90-day mark or so, they just start to not, and then they're stuck with a belief and the ever-failing diet. And so I'm just saying that not as like a bash on anyone, but as a cautionary tale. I felt it before too, like what's going on? And that's the reason why we test every 90 days with Upgraded. So
I'm going to say something. And if you've already finished your book, it's going to be a problem because you're going to have to do it. I think you're going to have to add an addendum here.
We got 2 more chapters left.
All right, good. Here's the deal. All diets do not fail. Yeah. The elephant diet does not fail the elephant, and the lion diet does not fail the lion, and neither does the chimpanzees or the chameleons or the leafcutter ants. The word diet in science means evolved lifestyle, and none of them fail. What fails is fad diets.
That's what I mean.
Yeah. I know, I totally know it, but the reason I say that is that I believe that the answer to this is, and the reason that all diets fail is they do very much the thing you're talking about. They put somebody in a particular extreme position that achieves the short-term, maybe achieves the short-term goals that they were trying to achieve, then the person links the achievement to that particular situation and gets stuck with it. And then there, bam, you've got the problem. So veganism is a very good example of this. And I went through it and Paul went through it. You're sick, you're eating processed garbage. And then one day somebody comes along. In my case, it was Tony Robbins. He's like, you got to eat different. You got to make some changes. And I'm like, here I go. I make a bunch of changes. And not all of them are about veganism. I gave
massive action.
I took massive action. I made distinctions. And so what happened was my health radically improved and my identity had changed at the same time. My identity was I went to vegan, even though many of the changes I made had nothing to do with veganism. And many of the changes were more valuable to the change than anything I'd done as a vegan.
Totally.
My identity changed. I linked my identity change to the health upgrade and assumed that was the problem. And then bam, I'm stuck with that for the next, whatever it was, 5 years or something. And it damaged me.
Totally. Look, these are just cautionary tales for people. If you've been there, if you are there now, like we're not really even trying to persuade, except to say, I've seen how this story plays out. And there's a story arc. Yeah.
One thing that I really would want to persuade people is that, and I think it very much fits with what you're saying about there's no one diet that fits every season of your life. And I would put that a little bit differently. And I like to use the bears of Mendocino County when I think about this. You're up in Mendocino County. John Gray, who wrote the Mars Venus books, is a good friend of mine. I was up at his ranch, went out for a walk one day, and there's a bunch of bear shit in the driveway, literally steaming. So that bear's by, right?
Yeah.
And in the bear shit, there's bits of berry bush with some unchewed berries that have made it all the way through. And that's part of the deal. Anyway, you start thinking about it. They're in berry season and they're eating heavy carbohydrates. They're eating lots of honey. And why are they doing that? They're doing that to prepare for winter, right? Yeah. They're doing that to prepare for winter. They're fattening up. They're slowing their metabolism down. They're increasing their cravings for carbs. They're increasing their aggression, which sugar does, to make sure they get their share at any bush. Yeah. But now, what do you think would happen if we trap that bear in the Mendocino fall forest? If we never let that season change.
Wow. It looks like America.
That bear becomes obese and develops diabetes, by the way, without seed oils. Now, I'm not suggesting, I know Paul and a bunch of them are all about seed oils causing diabetes, and I totally agree.
Of course.
And I believe that what they do is exacerbate the very thing you're talking about. They exacerbate the lack of seasonality that this plant was available for long enough for you to get benefit from it, but not long enough for you to let the toxin.
That is a great insight. That is a great insight. I really love that. Yeah, because the sugar gets converted. Sugar, when not used, gets converted to fat. For anyone listening that's not clear on what Eric's really saying, the ultimate conclusion there. And that's great if you're going into winter, but none of us as humans need to sleep for several months at a time. And it's really, not a good model for us.
No, because it's not even that the average American is stuck in fall Mendocino forest. The average American is stuck in what we call junk fall.
Junk fall.
It's not only carbs, but it's the shittiest carbs ever. Let me transition from there to heavy metal toxins in general.
Sure.
Because I get this question from my clients a lot. I'm not an expert. I have theories. I have ideas. As you said, we're dealing with 1,000 times more pollution than we can't help. Yeah. I choose right now. I've lived here in the Dominican Republic for the last 12 years. I think you and I talked about this before. One of the reasons I live where I live is that the air that we breathe blew from Africa and hasn't touched landfall in 3 weeks. It's about as clean as air can get.
Yeah.
And equally, our beach sand is fully taken away every year by the beach, and then it's by the ocean, and then it's returned. It's the cleanest sand you could possibly imagine. It's small environmental considerations, but the fact of the matter is there's still pollution everywhere.
Yeah.
So now on Instagram.
That example, if people haven't heard, the one you've given about the island in the middle of nowhere, like one of the most remote islands in the
Midway, the Midway Islands, I know what you're talking about. I wish I had that picture on file, but you're exactly right. The videographer shows up on the island and sees a bird nest, and the bird is dead. The skeleton is there. They don't have any ground predators, so the skeleton's untouched. And there's literally little bits of plastic from the gullet to the anus all the way through the bird's digestive system. And this is on one of the most remote islands on the planet. So if that bird can't avoid it, we can't avoid it.
Great.
Let's talk a little bit about this. We
Mhm.
joked earlier that if you were to listen to Instagram, you have to stop eating everything. I've heard on Instagram that I shouldn't have eggs. I definitely shouldn't have meat. I shouldn't have milk. I shouldn't have cheese. Shouldn't have kale. Shouldn't have broccoli. Shouldn't have any cruciferous. And I shouldn't have
Yeah.
any nightshades. And I shouldn't, peanuts, definitely can't have that.
Yeah.
Every single thing is toxic in some way, bad in some way, and so on.
And at the same time, cruciferous, you need it because it's going to clean out your colon and you need to get sun, but also if you get sun, it's going to kill you. And then
Yeah.
you
And
should
of
eat
course-
red meat, but if you eat too much red meat, like what we're talking about, there is an iron overabundance. It comes back down to, are you testing?
Seasons.
Are you guessing? Are you eating the same 5 foods all the time? What's your absorption rate? Do you have leaky gut? Do you have low stomach acid? And what's your genetics? Yeah.
And I do believe that one of the ways to deal with that is to mimic as closely as possible the seasonal realities of our ancestors. There are seasons where you eat carbs and there are seasons when you don't. There's seasons when you don't eat at all.
Yeah.
These things kind of happen. But I'm curious now about toxins because, of course, there's the first step, which is to try to avoid them as best possible. But honestly, if we listen to Instagram, that means we have to avoid everything, and that doesn't work. So now I'm sitting here. I want to eat this. Say I'm not a vegetarian. I've got my steak. I've got my ribeye here. I am aware that there's some environment. I don't care. I've done the best I can. It's not even a beefsteak. It's a bison steak from outside Yellowstone National Park. It's as good as it gets, and it's still going to have some level of toxins.
Sure.
Here's where what I'm going to have to say. I'm going to eat that. I'm going to eat that because it's what is available. And now I am going to get toxins in my body. I'm going to breathe them. I'm going to drink them. Is it fair to say that one of the ways of cleansing yourself of these things is to be well nourished? Is that a fair statement that the more well nourished you are, the better capacity your body has for getting this stuff out?
For sure. So if I had a whiteboard behind me, I would draw a big circle denoting a cell and say 2 things. One is to have a cell that is like a good army, like well supported with all the things it needs, and that is nutrients. And so when that cell has that, it's able to detox well.
Right.
So if toxins come in, it has the magnesium and the copper to make ATP along with oxygen. And then by doing that, it's able to create enough energy in the little power plants in the cell. And we might have 1,000 of these in a cell, right? And then at that point, it has the energy to excavate, it has the energy to remove toxins. If you don't have that energy, which most of us don't, I take magnesium to fall asleep every night, the form that I've developed. It's a delivery system. I also take it in the morning and at lunch for energy because it does so many things in the body. I think it's the most important thing to supplement, period, because it does over 3,500 things in the body. And so again, elements, but a clean house and imagine it as if it's a city. Right. So in the city, you have a central hub, let's say, in a standard city today. Maybe it will be different in the future. Certainly will. But let's say we have a power plant in the city, and that city is safe and clean because it one has enough energy to keep the street lights on, to keep crime down, to help in all sorts of ways, to keep roads flowing and all that stuff. The moment the power goes out in the city, what happens? Congestion, right? What happens? Crime as a result, all sorts of. And then cells become like a pond instead of a flowing river. And that pond stagnates. And so we want to get away from that and back to that flowing river.
I've got you. And I guess one of the ways that I would translate that is that at the end of the day, you're in a room and maybe there's some smoke in the room, but you still have to breathe.
Yeah.
You don't have a choice. And so what that means is we do the best we can. We eat the best quality food that we can get. We know that it's not ideal anymore, but that by being well nourished, our bodies are in a better position to deal with the environmental toxins we're dealing with. And I think that's a key distinction. I see so many people afraid to eat things and things that they need to have. And that always gets to me. So I want to push back to a little personal. I have a question for you. A lot of times you do a lot of podcast interviews. I really enjoy going out and doing that. You mentioned in the pre-show watching the interview I did with Jordan Peterson. What an incredible! It was the first time I was on a podcast where I don't think any of the questions had ever been asked before.
Yeah.
He does a totally different dive, right?
He does. He really
I
does.
had many of my friends come back to me and go, I feel like I know you better now. Like it was a deep psychological. He's a psychologist, but I want to do that a little bit. People go on podcasts and they're really happy to talk about what's gone, what they've overcome, their own hero's journey. And those are some of the most valuable stories in the world. But what I want to do is put it back to you and go, hey, what's going on right now? What are the biggest challenges that you're facing in the moment, and what are you doing about it?
Great question. This will be good. The first thing I thought of is I was in Playa del Carmen visiting my new head of growth for the company. And I'm a big fan in following my intuition that has become pretty attuned the last probably 5 years or so. It wasn't always this way, but now it's so clear that usually it's to the point of, all right, walk left around the table, not right. And you're like, why? And then the one thing that you don't listen to, and then you bump into someone and then they have a glass in their hand and the glass falls. And you're like, damn, that's interesting. All
Yeah,
right.
yeah.
And so my intuition said, don't eat this street coconut that was peeled the shell off and it looked really nice. It was like white. And I'm like high potassium. I love coconuts, all things. And so I was like, I probably shouldn't. I looked over at Caleb, who's really brilliant in health as well. And I said, what do you think? And he lives there. And he said, oh, it's fine. But he has more of a laissez-faire attitude. And I was like, probably shouldn't. And I was like, I'll get some. And I probably only took 3 or 4 bites. And I was like, nah, that's a bad idea. I threw it away. Because I'm like, ultimately, they have a machete, right? And are they cleaning things to my standard? If they're selling it, no, they're not. Are they cooking it? No, they're not. And I generally have a rule, and now it is really a rule. In foreign places, I really don't eat. I eat cooked vegetables. I don't
Yeah.
eat, if I'm eating vegetables. Otherwise I'm just going to eat like carnivore for a while.
Hell, when I go to India, I won't even eat vegetables like that.
Exactly. No,
Yeah.
for sure. For sure. And so this was a different level. I've been to all over Central and South America a lot, and as you have. And so I was like, yeah, it's fine. And I'm telling you, like, it's been like 2 months at least that I've had so much. It's just a bacteria in the stomach that's causing loose bowels. And not even just like the body's not holding on to water well. It's just like you drink water and the water goes through you, even with electrolytes. And I was like, wow, this would be pretty dangerous in a situation where you don't have electrolytes and you're hot and you don't have a good water source. It literally would be, because I can't tell you how many times I've woken up with cramps as a result.
Jeez.
And then I take the liquid magnesium and also a cramp formula. Either one of those is incredible. So I go back to sleep. But I would say my chance of waking up in the night has gone up like 80% or something like that in that period. And so that's affected sleep and all sorts of things. And now I'm on the path toward fixing it. In this case, it's a saliva sample, understanding the exact bacteria, and then using a homeopathic that carries the frequency. And you put that into the body often enough, and over a couple of weeks, it breaks that in the body. It's really metaphysical almost. And it was a channeled solution by a woman years ago that's passed away. And yeah. So that's the thing top of mind. Other than that, health was honestly about as good as it's been. But it just shows you how delicate we are. Even I'm one of the more knowledgeable health optimizers, I would say, alive today, with my background in science, with my understanding of nutrition, with all the guinea pigging I've done since 8 years old in wrestling. When I realized, I can't eat a candy bar and have a good wrestling practice. Poof,
Yeah.
this is rough.
tell
I
you
don't know what
that-
it was about the candy bar, but I can't do it. And then
Bikram yoga, both Bikram yoga and jiu-jitsu both taught me so much about my response to food because they're extreme.
Exactly. Yeah. And so anything that's going to be hot, like, I love yoga, did jiu-jitsu for a year after high school, because I was like, wow, what do I do without wrestling? It was always such an ingrained part of life.
Yeah.
And all of these feedback, what are they? They're really feedback loops. So it doesn't matter what you're doing. It could be running, it could be marathoning. I helped a friend of mine. He had run 12 Ironmans, never qualified. He ran one more. We worked on all of his hydration, did a hair test, got him dialed, and then he qualified for Kona. And he was having a great race.
Wow.
Yeah, and so
He's the guy I just had on episode just before you. He a really neat guy, Brian Keane. He's done the Marathon des Sables, 6 marathons through the Sahara. I'm not doing that one.
crazy. I'm so relieved that I did all my physical challenges that I felt I had to prove myself. Like I really maxed that out early in life. And I don't feel pressured at all whatsoever to prove myself anymore. Like I feel confident. I feel I have the skill set, all that. And thank God, because I don't want to be in the Sahara right now.
I gotta tell
On
you,
like a camel or doing
I
something.
want to offer you a little I want to offer you a little perspective on that because
Yeah.
I used to run these leadership programs where I took people up Kilimanjaro, and I always said I would never do it again. And then one of my clients asked me if I would consider doing it again for them, and they're a big Fortune 500, super exciting project. I'm open to it. But I also got to a stage where I'd done all these things. I'd done these incredible physical challenges. And in fact, two of my friends that have done the Marathon des Sables both told me that the summit down Kilimanjaro was actually harder.
What?
So,
Wow,
just
that's
to put that in
crazy.
perspective. And
That was the one mountain I was thinking about climbing, but before this conversation, there you go.
it's also unbelievably rewarding and worth doing. So,
I'm sure.
But what I would say is that
Yeah.
one thing that I've really run into with this is that the universe is going to provide challenge to you.
Oh, for sure.
And those physical challenges are almost like your choice to choose them.
Yeah.
So what I found is that I stopped doing those Kilimanjaro trips a few years ago, and lately I've just been hit with a number of challenges that I would never have chosen. Frankly, I don't know how to put it, but it's like I have not handled them as well as emotionally as well as I would have. Like I feel like by not taking on more of those physical challenges, I feel like the mental toughness has actually atrophied a little.
I think that's a value I've contemplated in doing jujitsu again and getting back into this. I mentioned it since you've done this before too. And so I have a lot of friends that are in it. As a wrestler, it was very natural as a progression. And yet I'm like, I don't need to tweak my knee again. I don't need to. I just did surgery and stem cells. It's great. It's healthy again. And that was an injury from 8 years old wrestling that I carried my whole life and finally got fixed. Don't need that. And also you need I did something hard, ate the frog, so to speak, and now the rest of the day is very easy. It's our perspective on things, I think, more than anything. And some things are just hard, but sometimes we in our mind, we tell ourselves this is unfortunate, it shouldn't be happening, all these different things. So yeah, I'm totally with you. Yeah.
I will say this about Kilimanjaro, if you were serious about contemplating it. One of the things that's fascinating about Kilimanjaro is that anyone can do it. It's not demanding in the way that, say, jiu-jitsu is or a Marathon des Sables. It's not, you don't have to be ultra fit. The reality is that it is a walk in the park in a literal and figurative way, and that the summit day is unbelievably challenging without triggering injury. It's not challenging in that way. It's challenging psychologically. The temperature's tough. The lack of oxygen is difficult. So it's an unbelievable opportunity for spiritual growth without really the risk of injury that comes with, say, rock climbing or jiu-jitsu or those other kinds of things. So really, if it's something you're curious about, I really believe that it's worth doing, no question about it.
I like to do these things now. Early in life, I like to do things by myself. I like to do things now, I find, with groups because strengthening relationships, and it's so easy to have a successful life these days, but also have I like to spend 8 hours a day by yourself. It's pretty easy. And so when I got 4 meetings and a couple work sessions and it's 7 p.m. It's okay. Wow. And so more group stuff, like groups we've been involved with. Yeah, I say yes to things like that. Yeah.
Speaking of
nutrition, hydration, things you've talked about before too. It's make sure you're hydrated before you're doing these things. Make sure you're prepared. I actually helped a friend. I forget what race, but it was Sahara. It was 3 marathons back to back. I think it's the longest continuous. That's what I was told, at least. And yeah, he did it with some charge, which is one of our electrolyte, and which a lot of people love. And I actually put lime.
It's kind of a limey taste, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, I put real lime juice in it to actually change the structure, so the whole thing is assimilated more easily and without digestion.
I quite adding it to I've got my little soda stream that does the carbonated water for me, and I like to add the charge to it. It's quite nice.
Oh, wow. Yeah, I actually haven't done that. That's a great
it's
idea.
good. It fizzes it up a bit, but it's really good.
My favorite drink to order, and this is for anyone out there, when you're trying to you don't drink alcohol anymore. I understand. I don't either.
Not since I was 19.
Yeah. So I haven't had a hard and fast rule like that, but it's been like I've gone a year at a time without drinking anything like that. But regardless, again, just to fit this in for everyone, if you are drinking, if you're not, the great replacement for something when you're having a craving for something like a margarita, you're actually craving salt, among other things. And most of us are deficient in good quality salt, and that salt is a hydration mineral. And so if you can I get sparkling water, like best quality I can find, and that's my cocktail for the evening with a salt rim and lime juice. And I started doing that when I was in Mexico traveling, and that has been the thing I order everywhere. And
Plus,
I've
it makes it look like you're drinking so you can fit in.
Exactly. It looks like you're drinking, you stay hydrated, you don't eat any street coconuts to try to get your hydration. It's like, it's great.
That's cool. I'm going to give it a try. I do a version of that every day. I
So
do.
what you're saying is exactly that, though. It's sodium and potassium that's in
Yeah.
charge with the sparkling water. That's awesome. It's crazy. I
Yeah,
haven't
that's
done it
super
myself.
cool. Let me, one last question before heading to the wrap up is you've accomplished a lot of stuff. And none of us are here alone. Who have been some of the biggest inspirations to you, the biggest influences to you, for you?
Really, really great. I love that question. Can I ask what, I can go a few different ways with this. So like in
Just
what
whatever comes
context?
to you.
In what context? All right, so the first thing that comes to mind is like how to think of like the challenge that I've been working on that's been really fun, that's taken up, like you're saying, taken place and precedent over some of the other challenges I used to choose was just building a business and creating a lifestyle around it was healthy where I could live what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
And so that's been something I've been able to do really well at this point. And also, there's always challenges in growing a company, growing a team, managing. And so, people I've learned from a lot. There's a lot of people that I could name that are friends of mine that people wouldn't necessarily know, but people that would know that did help a lot. Tim Ferriss was one that I really like. 4 Hour Work Week was a huge thing. The E-Myth.
Yeah, Gerber had a big impact on me as a kid when I started my first company.
Yeah, Gerber. The One Thing, that was a great book. And then there's a book on leadership called Straight Line Leadership. It's written by a Russian guy. His first name is Dusan, Dusan. His last name is something with a ton of consonants like Djokovic or something. And it's a green and black cover. Straight Line Leadership, it's 70 small chapters, like 3-page chapters where you just get a point and that's your thing for the day. And
I love that type of thing. The
it's
micro learning
beautiful.
these days, it's all the fad, but the truth is books have been like that for a long time. There's been some good.
Totally. And I think studying people that are also, I realized that I pushed back against, I wanted to study other people outside of that weren't engineers.
Yeah.
And so recently I've started studying successful engineering minds. So I've gone through, I've studied Da Vinci, I've studied Elon's a great engineer. Not everyone knows that. Some people think like it's only its teams. He actually pushes his teams the way he pushes them because he understands enough engineering in any different department to be able to
I would
go,
argue
this,
Jobs
this
was a bit like that
shouldn't.
too. You
What's
know, he
that?
was an engineer, but he knew what to ask for.
Yeah, exactly. And Ben Franklin's another, like people that are incredibly curious, so all their biographies are really good. And then people that are great at thinking, like Charlie Munger, Charlie's Almanac. That book probably took 4 months of reading. I was starting my company around the same time, so it wasn't like daily, but the mental models of that were really cool. People that just think well, like Darwin. Yeah, just like finding the greatest thinkers, and it doesn't matter if it takes you a while to read a chapter or a few pages, just the value of getting through like whatever it takes. And then the more you do that, the faster you learn.
I'm
So
totally
studying
one of
like
the,
hyper learners, I think has always been a thing. Yeah.
that's an eclectic or an interesting variety of different books. It reminds me that my dad, when I was a kid, he one birthday he sent me 2 books, and my brother had received like money for his birthday the few months before, so I was expecting money, and I got these books, and I like leafed through them, and there's no money in there, and I'm like, well, my brother got like $200, and I get books. I was
Yeah.
like, I was livid.
Yeah.
But the books that he gave me, and looking at it now, the first book that he gave me was the Valley of the Horses, which is part of the whole Clan of the Cave Bear series. Which, if you think about my life today,
Yeah.
I mean, what could have been a more perfect book than that?
Man. Yep.
And then the second book was a biography of Michael Faraday, and from his childhood through to meeting Sir Humphrey Davy to developing the dynamo. And I'm reading those things at 13 years old, and I cannot think for a moment that they didn't have a big impact on me. So I appreciate your list. I made some notes for sure.
That's
Tell
super.
me lastly, Upgraded Labs, like I can say
formulas.
that.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Oh, upgraded formulas. I think
Upgraded formulas. I'm sorry.
we own that URL too.
I'm
but
accidentally
because
plugging Dave Asprey over there, but upgraded formulas. And I want to say this about that generally I've been a really good sleeper in my life. I've done well in that area. And you and I had a conversation in some other country, in some faraway place, doing whatever. and you
Yeah.
talked about your magnesium formulation and sent some to me. And I have to tell you, I really enjoyed that. I've not really had the response. I know magnesium is magical for a lot of people to help them sleep. I think glycinate being the sort of more common one for that. But I will tell you that the upgraded magnesium that you sent, where I really felt a noticeable difference. I wear an Aura, so I have some sort of, in a sense, empirical sense of increased REM and increased deep sleep. So how do people find you? Where do they get your stuff? Tell me all about it.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. I just got a text, yesterday morning from a friend that said the same sort of thing. Hey, I just tried 8 hours sleep, which is a clinical dose version of that product. And he said something to the effect of, and he sent me screenshots too of his sleep tracker. And he said, I've never gotten sleep numbers like this. And I've never seen numbers like this. And really it's not about the form. And this is a different conversation, one that probably people would really love to have. And it's a common question, which is, I've heard that this form or that form of magnesium is really important, or what about all the forms? Or can we get all 10? And so the reason why that isn't a good solution is because it's not how the body does it with food. The body, when you eat a food that contains magnesium, it doesn't go, oh, hey, I need threonate, otherwise the brain doesn't work. It breaks it down to a small enough size that it gets into the bloodstream, and then it gets into the red blood cell. And then what happens? It gets distributed throughout the body in that fashion. And so I looked at that and I said, we can reverse engineer this. The only way to do it well is to do it how the body does it, because we're not changing the body system. We're working with it to skip digestion. So how do we get nutrient, whether it's magnesium or chromium or iodine? We do a really cool high dose iodine that's great for a lot of things. I travel with it all the time. It sterilizes water, all sorts of stuff. Antiviral, antiparasitic. And yeah, in looking at that, I realized, oh, we got to get the particle size small enough. And then it gets into the bloodstream because it is essentially at a size that has already been digested.
Right.
And so it has to be small enough, it has to be stable. And I didn't want to have liposomes or anything that was already created that was fatty, that would break a fast. So I've done an 11-day fast to heal injuries. I've done some shorter fasts too. And that's not advice for anyone. It's work up to that or to anything you need to do. But like you've talked about too, fasting was a big part of how we evolved. And certainly we wouldn't be here today if we couldn't fast.
Yeah.
And so it's a great way. We get stem cells coming out of bone marrow at day 4. There's so many great, beautiful benefits of fasting. So my pulled hamstring healed by day 8, by the way. And then my skin looked great, and I dropped 6 pounds of body fat that I've since kept off, probably 5 of the 6, even 4 years later. And yeah, really cool. Hormones upregulated after. Probably within a month, I put on more muscle because, again, I got rid of stagnant old cells. And yeah, all sorts of things really improved. So with the minerals, people can find all of that and the hair testing and consultations. And if you want to be a practitioner and work with us there and do that whole thing, there's pathways. You can do wholesale and stuff, but that's all at upgradedformulas.com. And yeah, just super appreciate you being on. The thing I'd say, again, to just close it out about magnesium is that it's not about the form, it's about the delivery system for us, at least. What's happened in the past decade or so is people have taught a particular form to help with sleep, for example, like you mentioned. And that can improve a average product. But the question I was asking was not, how do we build a car based on these parts on the shelf, so to speak? It was, how do we build a totally new car that achieves exactly what we want to achieve with nothing from the shelf so that we get exactly what we want? And the only way to do that was to start completely from scratch and to create a process, not an end product, but a process that produced an end product that was totally and radically different and absorbed without digestion. So we do that across all like 25 formulas, with the exclusion of upgraded tea, which is 5 super nutrients that all have clinical studies behind it. The last thing to mention is that magnesium product that you love. We did our own clinical trial on it to prove to people that it was incredible at sleep. And then we did a clinical trial on the tea product. And what we saw in the clinical trial on sleep was that REM sleep went up 160% at the high in 14 nights. And then deep sleep went up 250%. That was in 14 nights. And now, if someone's already at 2 hours, it's not going to go up 250%. But it got pretty much everyone to 2 hours that took it regularly. And then from there's a lot of other things to optimize. But if you're sleeping well, the body is so much more able to deal with stress and things like that. And actually, this goes back to just one thing you mentioned about iron. If your iron load is high, like yours has been, what happens is you put off ROS, so these reactive oxygen species. Magnesium gets used up in those ROS. So the more iron overload you have, the more your body pulls on your magnesium stores, the less energy, things like that. So a good way to, give blood immediately. I've been doing that. I gave blood. I got a script from a doctor because I knew what I was doing. I gave blood once a week for a month. Definitely don't do that without a script and without testing, but my numbers were super high. Part of that is because of shedding. Even if you didn't get a vaccine, you're around it. And so we've never seen iron numbers this high, and we've never seen heart issues this high. And they're correlated, and a big part of that is the vaccine. So it's the other thing, and that's a whole nother show. But
Yeah, that's a whole nother show, and that'll get us blocked on YouTube or something.
yeah,
Barton,
totally.
it's been a real pleasure. I always enjoy spending time with you, and hope that we get to cross paths. It seems like we might soon.
Yeah, I'm excited.
Yeah. I want to remind everybody to give the URLs again.
Upgradedformulas.com. And
You're on Instagram as well. People can find you there.
Yeah, Instagram, Ask Barton, and Upgraded Formulas there too. And then be putting out a lot more content soon after this book is ready to be published. I'll switch gears.
Sounds good.
But yeah, super.
Well done. Thanks very much. And listen, everybody, for tuning in. I just want to tell you it's been another exciting episode of A Wilder Life. I am a very curious person, and I will continue to seek out the very best people to help us address the difficulties we face in this very incredible modern world that we're living in. There's a phenomenal opportunity for us to combine what we know about our biology with incredible technological feats to create fantastic and outstanding lives. And that's what this podcast is all about. If it's resonated with you, of course, you need to subscribe. And if you are on a platform that allows you to come and ask questions, you should do that. But here's the most important thing. At various points in an interview like this, you hear little nuggets of information, and you realize that there's someone in your life that might benefit from that nugget. Somebody who's got a sleep problem, or somebody who's dealing with an allergies problem or a heavy metal problem, or whatever any of the things that we talked about today is. And so the very best favor you could send them, the very best favor you could do for them, is to send them this episode and let them know that at about 26 minutes, Barton said exactly what they needed to hear. So subscribe, all that stuff, and I'll see you on the next episode of A Wilder Life.
I hope you've enjoyed this episode of A Wilder Life. Please leave a review and share it. A Wilder Life with Eric Edmeades.